I was elbow-deep in chicken feed when I heard it, that high-pitched voice slicing through the morning air like a rusty knife. "Jeremiah Johnson, we need to talk." I didn't even have to look up. That voice belonged to none other than Helene Cartwright, the HOA president of Maple Hollow Estates and the self-appointed queen of petty regulations. She strutted across my lawn in her wedge sandals and floral print war uniform, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight they looked like they were trying to escape her face. "Helene," I said, brushing off my hands. "You're trespassing again." She ignored that entirely, eyes locked on the chicken coop behind me. "Those chickens are a problem." I folded my arms. "They're legal. City ordinance allows backyard hens. No roosters, no problem." I checked. "They're a health hazard," she snapped. "A threat to community safety. I've received complaints." "From who?" "You and your reflection." She acted like she didn't hear me, flipping through her clipboard like it contained the secrets of the universe. Section 8, Paragraph 3B of the Maple Hollow HOA Guidelines clearly states that hens aren't livestock under state law. I cut in. "Already checked that too." She blinked, caught off guard for half a second before her frown returned with double the force. "They smell. They're loud. They're unsightly, and they attract predators." "Helene, I clean the coop every morning. These girls are cleaner than your dog that barks all night." Her nostrils flared. "If they're not removed by the end of the week, the HOA will be issuing a formal citation and daily fines." I smiled politely, even though I wanted to laugh. "You do that." She spun on her heel and stormed off, nearly tripping over my garden hose. One of the hens clucked cheerfully behind me, like she knew exactly what was going on. Now, I'm not a confrontational guy. I'm a retired electrician with a love for gardening and peace and quiet, but if Helene wanted to escalate this, then fine. I had surveillance cameras, a copy of the HOA bylaws, and the city ordinances saved on 3 different flash drives. That night, I reviewed the footage from the past few weeks. Sure enough, there she was creeping around my yard, snapping photos of my coop, even trying to peer inside my shed. She'd been building her little case for weeks. The next morning, I got my own clipboard, printed all the relevant code, and left it on her doorstep with a sticky note that said, "You missed a few sections." 2 hours later, she was back furious. "You think this is a joke?" she shouted from the sidewalk. "No," I said, calmly sipping my coffee. "I think you're misusing your position to harass me." That's when she made her mistake. Helene marched up to the property line and threw a paper at my feet. "Effective immediately, you are being fined $100 per day for non-compliance, payable to the HOA treasury." I picked up the paper. It wasn't even on official HOA letterhead, just a Word document with Comic Sans font and her signature scribbled at the bottom. "You're not allowed to issue fines unilaterally," I said. "You need a board vote, and I wasn't notified of any meeting." She flinched. "I am the board." "No, you're the president. That doesn't make you a dictator." She stormed off again, but this time she left tire tracks on my lawn. That's when I decided if she wanted war over some chickens, she was going to get it. And I knew exactly where to start. By Friday morning, I'd cleared my schedule. Helene had stepped way past the line, and if she was going to misuse her position, then it was time to shine a light on everything she was trying to keep in the shadows. I started by calling up my friend Lewis, a city code enforcement officer with a knack for bureaucracy and a memory like a steel trap. We'd worked on a veterans housing project together 5 years ago, and I knew he'd have insight into how far an HOA president could actually go without board approval. "She tried to fine you without a quorum?" Lewis asked, incredulous. "She slapped a fake notice on my porch like she was handing out coupons," I said. "She also claimed the hens were a health hazard without any documentation. That's not just overreach. That could be considered fraudulent enforcement, especially if she's collecting money without procedural backing." He paused. "You still got that camera system you installed last year. Footage is archived and backed up. Then I'd say it's time to get the city involved." While Lewis filed a formal inquiry into the HOA's enforcement practices, I decided to pay a little visit to the county clerk's office. I pulled the HOA's original charter filing and discovered something interesting. The board was supposed to have 5 elected members. Helene was the only one currently listed. No minutes from meetings, no elections held in the past 3 years, and no public notices posted anywhere in the neighborhood. She hadn't just bent the rules. She'd snapped them in half and buried the pieces. I made copies of everything. Then I drove to the local precinct and filed a report for trespassing. I brought the video footage of her entering my property multiple times without notice or permission. The officer at the desk, a guy named Barnes, leaned back in his chair after reviewing the clips. "She's lucky she didn't get bit by one of those hens." "They're friendlier than she is," I said. Barnes chuckled, then got serious. "You want us to issue a formal warning?" I wanted on record, just in case she escalates. He nodded. "We'll file it." On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store and picked up a few yards of low fencing. If Helene wanted to act like she ran the neighborhood, I figured it was time for a little demonstration of free-range living. The hens had always been perfectly content in their coop, but they deserved a little vacation. Starting with her meticulously manicured flower beds, that afternoon, I set up the fencing along the edge of my property, right where the grass met her prized tulip border. Then I opened the coop. The chickens took to it like kids in a candy store. They strutted through the grass, scratching and pecking with enthusiasm, nibbling on fallen petals and sending little clumps of mulch flying in every direction. I didn't direct them, I just watched. With lawn chair, lemonade, and a copy of the HOA charter in my lap. 20 minutes later, I heard flip-flops slapping asphalt at a furious pace. "What in heaven's name are those things doing in my flower beds?" Helene's voice had gone shrill enough to startle the hens, who froze in place like they were posing for a courtroom sketch. "They're enjoying their afternoon," I said calmly. "They've been cooped up too long, and since you're so concerned about their well-being, I figured they could stretch their legs." "You're letting them destroy private property," she screeched. "They're still on my land," I said, pointing to the property line marker embedded in the grass. "Your flower beds are 5 inches over," I measured, twice. She sputtered like a tea kettle. "That's not possible. Those beds have been there since the subdivision was built. Doesn't change the survey lines. You encroached on my property." "I have the original plats from the development." She froze, her lips twitching as she tried to process that. "And since you've been trespassing," I continued, "I figured you wouldn't mind if my hens did a little exploring." "You're being deliberately antagonistic." "No," I said. "I'm matching energy." She stormed off, mumbling something about lawsuits. I stayed put, watching the hens dig a neat little trench under her rose bush. That evening, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as Don Mallory, a resident who'd lived in Maple Hollow Estates since the first homes were built. "Word's getting around," he said. "You're not the first she's tried to bully." "She's been running the HOA solo," I said. "No elections, no records, no checks and balances." "Wouldn't surprise me," Don replied. "Back in the day, she used to hand out fines for things like faded welcome mats, scared most folks into silence." "Not anymore," I said. "I've already filed complaints with the city and the police. I've got photos of her sending her nephew to paint over someone's mailbox while they were at work. They came home to a non-compliance fee for having the wrong color. Send me everything." I'm putting together a file. Over the next 3 days, the evidence rolled in. Photos, videos, emails. Helene had sent threatening fines over things like wind chimes and seasonal wreaths. I compiled it all into a single folder and brought it to the city's Community Oversight Board. We met in a small conference room downtown. Lewis was there, along with a city legal advisor and a housing liaison. I laid out the documents, the charter violations, the trespassing footage, the fake fine notice, and the testimonies from 8 different residents. "This goes beyond overreach," the legal advisor said. "She's operating without oversight, issuing penalties without legal backing, and using fear to control the neighborhood." "What happens next?" I asked. "She'll be audited. If she collected any funds under false pretenses, that's fraud. If she trespassed to enforce rules, that's criminal. And if she's been threatening residents, that's harassment." Helene had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't going to warn her. That Sunday, I hosted a block cookout in my backyard. Burgers, lemonade, lawn chairs, and about 20 neighbors, some I'd never even met before. The hens pecked around happily, occasionally wandering over to the fence line and eyeing Helene's now tattered flower beds like a buffet. "Did you really let them loose on her begonias?" one neighbor asked. "I didn't let them, I just stopped locking the gate." Laughter rippled through the group. As the sun dipped behind the trees, a black SUV pulled up to Helene's house. Two city officials stepped out, clipboards in hand. She opened the door and I saw her face fall as they introduced themselves. One of the hens let out a loud cluck. The entire crowd turned to look. "Justice," said Don, raising his soda. I raised mine back. "And poultry." Nobody left early that night, and nobody was quiet either. For the first time in years, Maple Hollow Estates felt like a real neighborhood, not a dictatorship with hydrangeas. By Monday morning, Helene's grip had cracked, but the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. Monday night, I got a call from City Compliance. The audit on the HOA's operations had turned up more than just unauthorized fines and missing board elections. A lot more. "Jeremiah," the voice on the other end said, "you're going to want to sit down." I was already in my workshop, cataloging receipts from the coop build, but I paused, wiping my hands with an old towel. "We've found multiple irregularities in the financial submissions," the official continued. "There are withdrawals from the HOA account that don't have any paper trail, no board signatures, no expenditure records, no invoices." "How much are we talking?" "Upwards of $26,000. I whistled low. That was more than just pocket change, that was embezzlement. "And it gets worse," he added. "A few of those withdrawals match the dates of property lien filings. We're looking into whether she used HOA funds to pay off personal legal fees." I didn't respond right away. I was watching the hens through the workshop window, the way they settled into their coop as the sun dipped low, completely unaware of the storm they'd helped kick up. "Do you need me to testify?" I asked, eventually. "But for now, we'll need you to submit your footage and documentation to a state investigator. This may escalate to criminal charges." I agreed. After hanging up, I backed everything up onto a new flash drive and tucked it into the fireproof lockbox under my workbench. Then I sent a message to Don to let him know things were unfolding faster than expected. He replied that he and several other residents had been contacted as well. By Tuesday morning, word had spread. I didn't need to say anything. Neighbors were already whispering on sidewalks, watching city vehicles roll through like clockwork. A man in a charcoal blazer knocked on Helene's door just after 9. She answered in a housecoat, hair twisted up in a wild nest, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and defiance. He handed her a packet and she slammed the door. The man didn't flinch. He turned and walked back to his car, calm and unreadable. By noon, 2 unmarked vehicles were parked outside her home. Uniformed officers stepped out, not city code enforcement this time, but county sheriff's deputies. They spoke with the officials already on scene, then entered her house with a warrant in hand. From my porch, I watched as they carried out several boxes, file folders, a laptop, a desktop tower, and what looked like a personal checkbook. She followed behind them, red-faced and shouting, but no one responded. One of the deputies simply held the door open as the others made their way out. By Wednesday, the entire HOA board, or rather, the illusion of one, had collapsed. The city had declared the governing structure invalid due to procedural violations and lack of legitimate elections. An interim administrator was appointed to oversee basic maintenance until a full reformation could be conducted. At the next neighborhood meeting, 38 residents showed up. It was held in the community library's multipurpose room, and for once, nobody was arguing about mailbox heights or flower colors. People were angry. But more than anything, they were relieved. Dawn stood up first, holding a printed spreadsheet. She charged my wife and me a fine for painting our porch, said the color didn't match approved palettes, but there was never any approved palette. I checked. A woman named Janine raised her hand. She threatened to tow my car because it was parked on our own driveway overnight. Said it was a security threat. She tried to force us to pay for a new fence around the retention pond, added a man near the back. Told us it was required by the county. We called the county. They knew nothing about it. Each testimony added a brick to the wall of evidence already built. I didn't speak until the end, when the interim administrator asked if anyone else had something to share. I stood slowly, pulling a folder from my jacket. This is a copy of the original HOA charter, the financial audit results so far, and footage of her trespassing on private property to manufacture code violations. I've submitted all of it to the state investigator already. The room was dead silent. Someone near the front let out a slow exhale. She used fear to keep people quiet, I said. But the only reason it worked is because we let her. That stops now. Applause didn't erupt, but heads nodded. People looked at each other not with suspicion, but solidarity. Later that evening, I was out refilling the hen's water when a boy from 2 houses down came by. He was maybe 12, wearing a baseball cap too big for his head. "Are those the chickens that messed up the flowerbeds?" he asked. "They are," I said, glancing at them. "They've got a bit of a rebellious streak," he laughed. "Can I pet one?" I nodded. "Just move slow, they like to feel safe." He crouched, holding out his hand, and one of the hens waddled over. He grinned wide when she let him gently stroke her feathers. "My mom says we might get some now," he said. "She said if we don't have to pay all those fake fees anymore, we can finally start the garden she wanted." "That's good," I said. "Chickens are great for gardens." He nodded, then stood up and waved goodbye. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The kind of sleep you only get when you know justice isn't just a word people say, it's something that can actually show up on your doorstep, clipboard in hand, ready to set things right. 2 days later, the county prosecutor announced that Helene was under formal investigation for embezzlement, misuse of public funds, falsifying legal documents, and criminal trespass. She'd been released pending further action, but the charges were stacking up. The bank statements alone showed she'd used HOA dues to pay off personal debt, make down payments on 2 separate vacation rentals, and even fund a short-lived side business selling community consulting packages to other neighborhoods. She'd marketed herself as an expert in enforcing order through decisive leadership. That part almost made me laugh. The city froze the HOA's accounts, and a full audit of her financial history was underway. The residents voted unanimously to dissolve the existing structure and start fresh. A temporary committee was formed, and for the first time in years, real elections were scheduled. I didn't run. I had no interest in running things, but I did offer to install a transparent records system using a simple online portal. Lewis helped me set it up: volunteer-based access, open minutes, and an automatic notification system for meetings. "It's boring," I told the committee, "and that's how it should be." The hens, they're local celebrities now. Some of the kids painted a little sign for their coop. "The Pecker Patrol Defenders of Liberty." I left it up. Helene hasn't been seen since the charges were announced. Her house sits dark, mailbox stuffed, shutters drawn. A for sale sign appeared a week later, planted crooked in the overgrown grass. No takers yet. At the next cookout, someone brought a cake shaped like a chicken. Another neighbor played a parody song on his guitar, something about feathers of freedom and flowerbeds of fate. It was ridiculous. It was perfect and me. I'm back to tending my garden, fixing up the shed, and watching my little flock do their thing. No more sneak attacks, no more fake violations, no more power-drunk clipboard tyrants, just peace, progress, and poultry. The morning Helene's house officially went on the market, there was a quiet hush over Maple Hollow. Not the uneasy kind we'd grown used to under her reign, but the good kind, the kind that settles in after a storm. Lawnmowers were humming again. Kids chalked up the sidewalks. Even the mailman seemed to linger longer, chatting with folks as if the neighborhood had finally exhaled. I was out back repairing a cracked fence post when a white SUV with tinted windows rolled to a smooth stop in front of her driveway. 2 men in blue windbreakers stepped out, each wearing a badge clipped to their belts and carrying flat black briefcases. They weren't from any department I recognized. They didn't knock. They walked straight past the for sale sign and into the backyard, where a third man was already snapping photos by the retaining wall. I leaned on the fence and watched. Eventually, one of them turned, noticed me, and made his way over. You Jeremiah Johnson. That's right. He reached into his coat and pulled out a laminated badge. Detective Caldwell, Financial Crimes Division. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Go ahead. He opened his notebook, tapping the top of the page with his pen. You filed a report regarding unauthorized fines, trespassing, and misuse of HOA funds. I did. Everything's been submitted to the city and the state's oversight board. If you want, I can get you copies. We've already reviewed them. What we didn't expect, he said, glancing back at the retaining wall, was to find a buried ledger under a loose panel in her backyard. I raised an eyebrow. Buried, wrapped in a Ziploc, sealed in duct tape, and hidden inside a hollowed-out utility box. It's handwritten. Names, amounts, dates. Some of the entries go back nearly a decade. I didn't say anything. I just waited. There's mention of a shell company, he continued, lowering his voice. One she used to funnel HOA dues into a private account. She disguised it as a maintenance contractor on paper. What kind of maintenance? He flipped a page. Tree trimming, sidewalk repair, pest control, none of which actually happened. Or if it did, it was done by companies that never issued invoices. We're tracking down the LLC now, but what's interesting is that she listed a few residents as co-signers over the years, without their knowledge. That hit like a bucket of cold water. You're saying she forged signatures, more than likely. We've already subpoenaed bank statements. If any of those names match account holders, she's looking at multiple counts of identity fraud on top of embezzlement. Behind him, one of the other agents waved him over and gestured toward the ground. Caldwell nodded, then turned to me. Has anyone else approached you about this? Anyone threatening you to stay quiet? No one's come near me since all this started. Honestly, I think most folks were afraid of her. But now, they're angry. Good, he said, tucking the notebook away. Because this is bigger than a power-hungry HOA president. If we can make this stick, it might set a precedent for how these associations are monitored going forward. He left me with a number and a warning not to talk to the press. I had no intention of doing that anyway. This wasn't about headlines, it was about making sure no one ever had to deal with what we did again. That evening, I got a knock on the door from a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight braid. She introduced herself as Martha Penrose, a retired paralegal who just moved into the neighborhood 2 months ago. I was fined $300 the week I moved in, she said. Claimed my moving truck blocked a fire lane. I paid it. Didn't want trouble. I invited her in and showed her the folder I'd kept with everything from the past few weeks. She leafed through it slowly, nodding. She pulled the same tactics in my last neighborhood, Martha said. Different name, different city, same MO. I thought she looked familiar, but I couldn't place it until now. You saying she's done this before? I'm saying she's been chased out of at least 2 other communities. She knows how to manipulate HOA structures. She targets places where the bylaws are vague and the board is barely active. I leaned back in my chair. That explains a lot. She might have changed her legal name. I'll dig into it, see what I can find. True to her word, Martha returned 2 days later with a stack of printed records. Helene Cartwright had previously gone by Eleanora Hartman, and before that, Lena Corwin. Both names were tied to dissolved HOAs in 2 separate counties, each with a trail of fines, lawsuits, and suspicious accounting patterns. We weren't just dealing with a local tyrant. We were dealing with a serial grifter. I passed everything to Caldwell. He didn't look surprised. She's covered her tracks before, he said. But this time we have too many witnesses, too much documentation, and now physical evidence. If even half of this holds up in court, she's done for. 3 weeks later, the charges were filed. Wire fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, criminal misrepresentation, and obstruction. She was arrested at a hotel 3 counties over, trying to check in under a new alias. The arrest made the evening news. A few neighbors gathered on my porch to watch the segment. No one said much. We just sat there in lawn chairs, sipping coffee and listening to the anchor summarize the downfall of a woman who'd once tried to fine someone for having an overly whimsical mailbox. The new board held their first election the following weekend. It was organized, transparent, and well-attended. Martha was elected chair unanimously. Don took the treasurer role. They passed a motion to refund all illegitimate fines using the remainder of the frozen HOA funds once they were released by the court. They even agreed to set up a yearly audit requirement moving forward. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was better. It was quiet, grounded, real, the kind of change that sticks. After the meeting, I walked back home and found a small wooden coupe sitting on my porch, painted soft green with little white trim. A note was attached. For the girls. Thanks for starting the revolution. I set it up beside the old one and watched as the hens cautiously explored it, one by one. They pecked, flapped, and eventually settled in like they'd been there all along. That night, I sat on the porch until the stars came out. The neighborhood was finally still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from fear, but the kind that means peace. Helene wouldn't be coming back. The state had issued a lifetime HOA ban as part of her plea agreement. She'd served time, and when she got out, she'd be barred from holding any position of authority in a residential community ever again. The chickens, they were thriving. One of the younger ones had started laying for the first time. I named her Liberty. And the woman who tried to rule with fear and fake fines. She was just a cautionary tale now, something whispered about at cookouts and late-night porch talks. A name etched in the neighborhood's memory not as a villain to be feared, but as proof that when people stand together and hold the line, even the worst tyrants can be toppled. We didn't just win. We changed the rules, and all it took to start was a few clucks in the right direction.